All right.
Yeah, there we go. Cool.
Take two. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IQ MuleSoft Study Group for the MuleSoft RPA. I'm Whitney Akinola. I host this study group with Ryan and Victoria every week, and Diane every other week. And this week, we're going to talk about MuleSoft RPA with our very own KJ Fenton, or at least Salesforce's very own KJ Fenton. We'll give you, he'll tell you all about his journey and how to get started at as a automation solutions engineer. And then he's going to give you a MuleSoft RPA demonstration from start to finish that we know you'll love. And then after that, we'll have some closing remarks. So now it's time to put KJ on the spot. But before we do this, here's an IQ code of conduct. And I got this from KJ. So if your mom or dad would have told you not to do it, please don't do it. Here
I thought that
at
was pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we mean by that, here at Integration Quest, we like to have fun, and we provide a safe learning experience during our study groups that is free. So, but with that, sometimes we get people that may want to have fun a different way. So please, we ask you to just keep it a really nice learning experience. All right, that's it. So now, how to become an automation solutions engineer. You're up, KJ.
Cool. Awesome. So name's KJ. As you can see this, short for Kyle John. It's a nickname from a branding perspective. If you're in sales, the more you can brand yourself and be memorable, the better. So a nickname like KJ just lands. Originally come from upstate New York, and no, not Albany, like actual upstate. If you're from New York and you say Albany's upstate, no, that's downstate. Don't lie to me. But I moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina, when I was 21 years old. My wife and I decided to take a chance on ourselves and move out of New York. It was the greatest decision I think we made. Love working out. I bowl regularly. I bowl in a league every Wednesday. Play music. I'm a normal person. However, with that, I do complement all of that with my professional career, which is as an automation solutions engineer for Salesforce, specifically MuleSoft. Ryan, sorry, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
I just saw something on LinkedIn. You said you bowled a 600 something. What the heck did that mean?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll just go into it real quick. So, my average, anytime I roll a game, so to speak, my average this season, and it's actually low in comparison to what I'm used to, is a 204. So, anytime I go up, I'm shooting a 200 or more. My normal average is usually a 210 to 220. I'm pretty much a semi-pro bowler. I grew up bowling like in upstate New York, right? What do? You bowl, and then you are old enough to learn how to drink, and then you drink and bowl, right? It's kind of what happens. So needless to say, I bowled 6 to 15, stopped as an adult, did a lot of other things, and then eventually fell back into it a few years ago, applied the discipline of being an adult, and I'm actually a pretty good bowler. So I actually went a month and change without actually hitting my average, and it just kind of sucked. So a 643 means I was averaging a 214 game for 3 games. So that's what that means. Yeah, so if you don't follow me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. Connect with me. I pretty much accept everyone. Every Thursday, I just post my bowling scores in case people want to see. So that's what Ryan's referring to there. Anyway, back to my professional career. When I started out my career, I went to Syracuse, got an IT management degree, and fell into management consulting at EY. At EY, I was working on anti-money laundering projects. Mind you, I'm 21, 22. I'm not necessarily doing much other than what people are telling me, much like most of us in our careers. And I found myself into doing what you'd consider swivel chair work. Now, if you hear swivel chair, that's your data entry exercises. These are usually perfect use cases for some sort of automated capability. RPA is no exception. So actually, I wasn't actually learning RPA tools then. I actually taught myself VBA. So I was actually writing macros because a lot of my work was going through Excel sheets and, creating all these formulas and so on and so forth. And eventually I'm like, oh, I can write macros for this. And then I started learning macros across the Microsoft Office suite. That led to a recruiter reaching out to me and say, hey, you want to make more money? And I said, yes. I mean, who doesn't want to make more money at 23, 24? And then they said, hey, you should go learn this RPA stuff. So I fell into RPA consulting and development in early 2018. That's where I spent about a year building out projects in a competitor to MuleSoft, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism. I actually got certified in UiPath and AA during my time at ISG. Did it for about a year, realized I didn't want to be the developer. If you like development, I think it's a great tool to have in your tool belt outside of obviously learning other languages, whether it's C++, Python, list goes on and on. But I did that for about a year and then I realized I like the demo aspect. I don't necessarily care to harden code, but I want to be able to educate people in how this is. It's like the demonstration you're going to give. And then I became a sales engineer at UiPath at the end of 2018. And I rocked that for about 5 years until I jumped over to Salesforce last year. So big wealth of experience there. I think the big summary statement of if you're looking to get into solutions engineering, I actually tell people go learn the tool and implement it first. It's a really easy way to back into it because I think if you want to be sales oriented, you want to be able to talk to people, deal with a little bit of the arduous nature of what sales is. You got to be a little chummy, right? If you don't necessarily care about that, that's totally fine. You can go the implementation route, still get some of that customer facing experience, but you don't have to worry about the sale. You're actually worrying about solving legitimate problems. Sales engineering is a combination of both of those, but I just wanted to make sure I shared my experience there to prove, hey, I'm capable and qualified, and it is a viable path for people. And I think RPA is a skill that once you learn ours, you'll learn them all. I would recommend, obviously, learning more than one. I think it's fantastic for everyone because I think it just makes you a better solution architect to actually solve real problems that people face. And not for nothing, who doesn't love getting a certification? So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Is there anything that people want to chime in on that? Should people resonate with, or so on and so forth? Otherwise, we can get straight into
I
helping you
think
guys
it,
out
I,
too.
I think I might represent some of the others in here. I know I recognize some of you who showed up. So hi Max, hi JC. I'm actually, and I could go down the list. Wow, Sonali, Shayna, Vasavi, people like who are like me, engineers coming from the
Yep.
other side. And I
Hmm.
just like KJ and I have met a few times about this, and we our minds meet on this
Yes.
automation superpower, right?
Hmm.
So coming from the API side, I can't do certain things without automation. Like
Right.
it's letting me do things so for people like me watching what you're also showing us things that we can't do even with all the programming languages.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because, or you have to sit there and build out your own function and put a wrapper around it and create an activity pack that you see what I'm saying is like there's this level of effort that goes into it. Yeah, what you're creating is end-to-end point solutions. That makes perfect sense. But sometimes, and this is where I think the sales engineering comes into play, is like, well, what's more important to you? Is it important to do it right? Or is it important to get time to value until you can get the resources to do it right? And I think that's the crux and the key. And that's why RPA is probably here to stay, right? Because it has the functions and the capability. Now, I agree with you. Look, if we can API everything, yeah, absolutely. But everyone on this call understands that's not necessarily a reality unless we have the resourcing and someone from the top saying, let's do this. So there's these intermediary steps. And that's why Salesforce made the acquisitions of the products that they did. And we're baking that into flow eventually down the line. So yeah, so you're exactly right, right? There's just two ways to look at it. I just like looking at more business value context. You're just looking at more the actual technical solution, but there is a middle ground right there. Is it possible? If that answer is yes, what are we waiting for? We should go automate it. So yeah, it's pretty much the
I
summary.
think
It's a good call
one
out there, Ryan, for sure.
I think one interesting thing about your story is how you just fell into it.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's how most of us have interacted with at least a MuleSoft project in general. Like when I started out at MuleSoft or working with MuleSoft, it was because my company had it. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, this is a hot product. So
Hmm.
let me go learn it. So
Bingo.
most of the time people kind of their companies have it and then they'll go learn it, embrace it, and love it. So I love that part about your journey. And I wanted to ask you this question here, but before I
Sure.
ask, I want to do something a little different, guys. And Ryan doesn't know about this, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to launch a poll. I've never launched a Zoom poll in my life, so let's see how it goes. So I'm gonna hit launch, and you guys tell me if you see it. Can you see the poll?
We
Yeah,
can.
it's up. Yeah.
All right, so no pressure. We just want to know if you've ever used the product and if you ever used any other tools, RPA tools. Pretty simple.
I'm watching the polls as we come along. Okay. Yep. Seems like right now. I'd love to hear what the others are from the cool. And you guys can throw in
Yeah.
the chat. I'd love to see what the others are. I mean, I expected, MuleSoft naturally with this group and UiPath being there too. I mean, UiPath owns 1/3 of the freaking RPA market. I mean, I would expect it to be abused at some point.
Just in case if we say no, like we haven't used any RPA so far, like we are not able to attend anything for the second one because it's a mandatory question.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
just put other then. If it's other and you
Yeah,
haven't used it,
other
that's
is
fine too.
fine.
That's fine.
Yeah,
It's not a
just
big
put
deal.
other.
That's fine.
Yeah. Guys, I told
Just
you
more
this
of
is
a
my
gauge.
first time
Yeah.
launching polls, so I'll get it for the next one.
Yeah, but this is good though, and I
That's
like
a good
this because
one.
yeah, what I'm seeing is like a lot of people haven't necessarily used this before, and that's pretty common. Um, and I think it's just because it's, I think when we get to the point of automation and integration, it becomes, oh, I need a techie for it. I actually disagree with that entirely, right? And mind you, I'm a little ambitious and I get yelled at about this all the time. But I think it's more along the lines of if you're saying you haven't necessarily used an RPA tool, here's what you probably understand. There's something that someone's doing that's if then else logic. It's repeatable in nature. It can be standardized. And the only thing we're lacking is the ability to code it. Well, if you can pull it in a low code function and understand the actual click strokes, you can build it in RPA. And once you understand that, then it opens this whole horizon of eliminating the technical barrier to entry and actually trying to make sure we can solve a business problem. Because at the end of the day, if you can prove a hard ROI or even a soft ROI, you're going to get the resourcing and the funding that you need, assuming you can sell it. Hence why I fell into sales engineering and didn't necessarily stay on the solution architecture and implementation route. Not everyone needs to do that, but I think the more you can learn how to actually substantiate the value of what you can automate, it's a lot easier to figure out what tools to fit in that. And that's why I'm really excited to see a lot of people who haven't used the tool before to just at least give you exposure. I'm not expecting you to become a developer after this call, but do hope I can show you, oh, that's actually not that hard. It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. So I like that. I like that. I like this.
So I can't see any of the polls being answered. So has everyone taken time to answer the poll?
Yeah, all 13. Yeah, so we've got
Oh, you can see it?
23%. Yeah, I can see it. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, so you've
I
got
can see it and
3
I
out of
can't
13
see it.
people have used MuleSoft RPA before, and those same 3 people said that was the tool that they used. Looks like one of them also has used UiPath. And now that wasn't me. I can't vote on it. But the rest of the people have not used RPA before. Hey, Maverick, that's my son in the back. And no, so this is actually a pretty general audience, which is pretty good. That's cool. I think it's a
All right.
good starting point, honestly, for automation integration.
So I'm going to end the poll. And there's the results. I don't know how KJ has seen the results before me, but that's good. Um, but yeah. Okay. So I share the results and I'm going to stop sharing. And now, can you still see my slide? Can you
We
tell
can.
us what's good for RPA?
Yeah. So as we had alluded to, right, I think I actually want to read this right to left because I think if you're familiar with MuleSoft, I think it's a good thing to bring up. So obviously we have the Anypoint platform that has been baked into API-led connectivity. That's the value prop of MuleSoft, and that's been the value prop of MuleSoft forever, which is APIM. That's really good for. We know we have the APIs. We want to package that up. We want to build the functions. We want to build a Mule app. We want to deploy that, invoke it with a third client. That doesn't change if you want to achieve that same function inside of Salesforce, because we are a Salesforce company, right? You'd want to use Flow. Then from that, we start backing into the composer. You're fine. You can keep going. I can still talk to it. The composer and the RPA tools. So I want to start with RPA. RPA is really, like I talked about, swivel chair type work, very nichey, like quick hit automations, repetitive tasks. We can diagram it in Visio. It's the same process every time. It's usually lower level type work, even if it is performed by high level employees. I want to make sure that's clear. We're not trying to diminish the work that people do. We're just saying sometimes literally at the end of a function, because it's been baked into the structural integrity of a process, you spend 5 minutes building some report that doesn't have an export function, right? It pretty much boils down to we don't have a connector, we don't have an API, we need to keep everything as is and throw a robot at it. So imagine if you could just replace you with a robot. That's what makes a good use case for RPA, which makes it very vast and kind of agnostic from a use case perspective, which is great. So I always back into if I can, if then else diagram this with the click strokes and the functions 99.99% of the time it can be automated using RPA. Doesn't necessarily make sense if it's the best way to do it, but if we think about time to value, you can probably build an RPA script a little bit quicker than trying to back into an API and string that together. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
I guess for me that there's one bullet I wish we could have fit on there, like that we have one that we're going to use RPA for that doesn't fit any of the other three columns because there is no API. So
Right.
we would use one
Yeah,
if
I
it was
didn't put it in
there.
there. I thought it was just table
Yeah.
stakes, but yeah, you're right. That's exactly right. Yep. Mhm. Yeah, so it pretty much comes down to if you can't search API docs and insert system here, or that function doesn't exist, RPA can be an intermediary. Now, the cool part and the value prop of MuleSoft is once you build an RPA script, we actually want you to publish that as an asset to Exchange, which creates a URL. So as long as you have a bot deployed, I wouldn't worry about the infrastructure now. You'll learn that later, but that's the whole point. It backs into that. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, and in your first one, you put UI, Excel, email, etc. I don't know if all of my techie friends are gonna appreciate how often it comes up that you're starting with an email with an attachment that's an Excel file.
It's like literally the classic, and it's funny, and it's really funny you bring that up. No, it's a great point because you're sitting there being like, Excel, that probably is sitting in some database somewhere, right? It's like, yes, I agree with you. Here's the problem though. The people who are ultimately looking for these automation tools aren't UIT heads. They're just not. Like they just aren't necessarily the type of people for automation. They're usually looking at, hey, we've identified this as a big problem. We've got the resourcing. We need to figure out how to do it. It's a different type of audience. So I actually like using RPA as kind of like the time to value tool. So then we can actually get those teams involved with the people who have been building these things for decades and saying, hey, why are you using a software robot? Why don't we back into actually doing this API led? So
Yeah,
you're
and
spot on. But all that, I
I'm
mean, literally, I have 3 demos next week, which are literally we get PDFs in an email. I need you to extract the data, and then I need you to show me how you input it into a system of record. And you're like, why wouldn't you EDI this? Well, it probably doesn't
because
exist for that
we
team.
probably will, but yeah, all you guys know, you
Yeah.
you want the Mules project to go fast, and fast for us is still 12 to 16 weeks.
Yes.
Fast for us, and even then, it's barely working. Like what you're talking about, fast is a different kind of fast.
I'm going to literally show you how to read from an Excel and input data into a system of record in 10 minutes. Like it's crazy fast, right? And when you can demo that and you can actually put some a little bit of governance around it, your time to value, that's really helpful to a business head because you know as well as I do, you show it anyone from a business perspective, like anything of significance, they go, oh my God, this is amazing. Take that momentum. And that's why I think learning these tools is really, really great. So yeah, I think enough about that. That's really what these are used for. This slide's here. This actually was curated by Diane as well. So I had to actually present this to her before I passed my exam. So just know this is legitimate. But to that point, I think that's enough. I think at this point, I'd like to step into the tool, actually show you the exercise, build some stuff, and then let you guys ask questions accordingly. Because y'all, at the end of the day, I'm very informal, pretty relaxed. Feel free to come off mute, ask questions accordingly, much like Ryan has. He's been a good facilitator for that regard. Yeah. Whitney, anything you want to add there before I share my screen and just get started?
No, I think you can share, and you're doing the RPA challenge, right?
I am. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want
So
to
I will do that.
mention? Okay, cool. So
Yep.
I'm gonna stop
I'll.
you
Mhm. Yep. I will
and
walk through all of that.
For our
Yeah, go
study
ahead.
group, while you're getting started, go ahead, get started, KJ.
Yeah,
No
you're fine.
problem
Yeah, keep going. You're good.
the screen. But I have been following KJ's crash course, so I know this is a MuleSoft RPA meetup. What he did in his videos, this is why I'm so happy KJ came here. He showed doing this with a different tool, UiPath, and we're going to do it
Mhm.
with Integration Quest with RPA, and it's really helpful to for me as a techie to know what he's doing and to follow it myself.
Mhm.
I'm a hands-on type of person. So, you can plug
Exactly.
your series even though it's not MuleSoft. It's
Oh yeah,
okay.
no, but here's the thing. Whatever exercise 3 was in UiPath, I only did it because I worked at UiPath. Guess what? I'm gonna do that same thing here, right? I'm gonna show you exactly what that is, right? Which is awesome. So this mimics, by the way, if you're thinking about this process, you're like, hey, I might not ever do this before. Here's what I want you to understand. RPA is mimicking extract, transforming, and loading information in a front end way, not a back end way. There are plenty of times where people need to grab a value from an Excel sheet, grab a value from one system, make a little bit of a string transformation, and then load that data somewhere else, right? You've done that 8,472 different times, right? It's no different. We're just going to show you the front end aspect. So this is called the RPA challenge. If you read it, it's very, very simple. There's an Excel that you can download. It's this Excel. It's got first name, last name, company name, all of those fields, and they correlate to this here. So I'm going to show you how using RPA, which is basic activities that you'll probably use if you find yourself becoming an RPA developer, how I'm going to read from this Excel for each row, take the corresponding column field and throw it into this system of record and to simulate a transactional nature. I'm going to click submit and we'll do that for all 10 rows of data. I'm going to show you how we'll do that beginning to end. Okay. That is the exercise at the highest level. It'll be really, really simple as we build that out. Whitney, I see you're off mute. Is there anything you wanted to add there, or just keep going?
No, it's your
Oh,
show.
your mic is doing the numbit. Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay. So when you build an automation using MuleSoft RPA, right, you have to facilitate this in RPA Manager. When you think about an RPA use case, it actually follows the same systems development lifecycle, standard best practices. Nothing changes, right? We need to evaluate an idea for suitability and readiness, right? So I'm going to show you how we create an evaluation. Then from that, you get into your design phase where you say high level, okay, what are the functions that we perform? Let's diagram that out. Once you diagram that out, you actually get into the build. So if you think about when you're actually building some sort of integration or automation, we don't want to throw away that. And actually, I kind of like how MuleSoft made the decision to be like, let's force people to follow best practices. I actually think that's great, right? Because other tools don't necessarily do that, which is awesome. So what you would do if you started with this is you would go into create an evaluation. Right. So once you click create, this assumes you have access to RPA Manager. As you start studying and learning and going through the courses, this will get more exposure, right? I'm obviously, bypassing some stuff, but you'd name it accordingly. I'm just doing this. I've got some other stuff, obviously, that I've done, RPA challenge, and I'll just do it for integration quest. We have templates that allow you to, for evaluation, I'll go through the qualifiers and criteria. What are they saying? Is your process stable? Is it error prone? Is it if then else logic? What's the benefit? You'll see all of that in a minute. I just have a category that I created for myself. You would normally add a description because, hey, not every time you're going to be the person who's necessarily building the automation. You might be the person submitting the idea, whatever the case may be. That's more of a change management exercise. But in short, regardless, in order for you to start building an RPA automation, you have to create an evaluation spec first. That's important. You have to understand that. I'm not saying these things because I'm trying to sell MuleSoft. I'm saying these things because, hey, it's on the exam, and not for nothing, that's the only way to do it. So there you go. You get the idea. Although Ryan's laughing over there because he just knows. Anyway, once you create the evaluation.
Wait. So we didn't this whole time talk about the exam. There is an exam. There's a Salesforce certification. KJ just passed it, and it's not easy.
No. Oh my God. I work here and it took me 3 times. Okay.
And it's not only RPA. So this thing is RPA.
Yes.
There's more stuff on it than just RPA. But
Yes.
I know we do a lot of certification stuff at IQ. So that's what he's talking about.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. And not for nothing, there's a good weight of RPA questions on the exam because of the composability aspect. And you'll learn if you're pursuing the cert. If you're not, this is just a great thing to learn. And I would say go explore and go nuts. I think it's going to be fun. Either way, if you are doing an evaluation, these 3 questions at top, honestly, are some of the most important questions ever because it helps determine, is this process valuable or not? So if we think about this process execution time, I actually did it. And I think I say in the recording on the YouTube video, it takes me like 5 minutes to do this manually. So it's not a crazy process, but 5 minutes for 10 rows, you can bubble that up. If you had 1,000 rows of data that you needed to complete, 10,000 rows of data, now you might start thinking, well, why don't we do a database shift? That might be true, but guess what? If we're dealing with a business team that doesn't have access to that, you get the idea. So we say process execution time only takes, it takes about 5 minutes to do this specific process. Cost per run, you'd have to do some sort of FTE equivalent. I'm just going to throw something in. It costs me maybe, $100. I'm just going to say I make a ton of money here. You get the idea. And the frequency, we do this, daily. So I'm just going to say 30 times per month. You would add a description. These are important. So the nature of work, right? If something is more rule-based, that increases its viability for automation. Why? If then else logic. The more you have to add judgments, the harder it is to automate. I would say that's no different if you're building an API, right? And especially true in API because there's an endpoint, right? You may have to add some AI, whatever the case may be. Is the data we're interacting with structured or unstructured? The more structured it is, the easier it is to interact with it. Why? Back to the if then else logic. Is your process stable or not? If it is stable, meaning it's probably not going to change much because it's, once again, the working fabric of whatever the business process is. If change management has not made its way to it, it's probably a good case for RPA. And then ultimately the data type, if it's image based, obviously I think you get the idea. The more OCR we have to use, the harder it becomes to automate. We're talking about text and numbers. And as you can see from the qualifier perspective, it has launched that to the top category. So these are a little bit of some judgment calls, but the higher that we can get into the top right on the process matrix proves how stable, I'm saying that purposely because that's an answer on the exam, the number one thing that you should be asking yourself from an RPA perspective is this process stable? If that answer is yes, it's probably a high likely candidate for RPA just from a napkin math perspective. The deeper you get and the more requirements you gather, you get the idea. But long story short, theoretically high level, if your process is stable and if the note's logic, it is a good candidate for RPA, even if the benefit is super low. Okay. Moving into those benefits, right? I actually think we need to flip this on the template, but right. So just switch these in your head real quick, right? If there's no issues from the output, it's the same output every time. We know that in the website, it's just submitting those, right? That makes it a better benefit. Is it a simple process or complex? That ties into more of your inputs and outputs. And then what's the risk of us not automating at risk? At that point, I think is neither here nor there. But obviously, the lower the risk, once again, these need to be flipped in the template. But right there, obviously, if it's low risk, like I said, you'll be looking at something that's there. So really, if you get something that's along the lines of like up here, right, in terms of like a stability, it's probably a good candidate for RPA. Hence why we give you kind of green boxes in your top right quadrants there. In short, you will need to know, if you do want to go past the exam, the qualifiers and the benefits. And the most important question, and I guarantee it's a question you'll get, is what's the most important thing to consider when evaluating an RPA process? It's always, is the process stable? That's at least one answer that you'll get right. Like I can say that because I got that all 3 times that I took the exam. So just something to keep in mind there. Before I move on and get into how we actually get into the build of this, does this make sense at least high level? I'm only bringing this up because one, you need to be able to do it to build an automation, but more importantly, this is what I've been doing for the past 6 years of my life, is this pretty much high level. So I just want to stop there, make sure this is all tracking before we move on here.
I have one question. So is there any specific quadrant quantity we need to take a look to decide whether to proceed with RPA or not? Because as in when I understood the stability is what we're looking at the prime, but do we have any numbers to consider as well in terms of quadrants?
I think that's going to come down to, honestly, it's more of a change management exercise versus a hard yes or no. Candidly, here's the easiest rule of thought that I say from a business perspective. If you are spending more money to not automate this in comparison to the cost benefit analysis of having a robot do it instead, that should be your answer. So you might find it's only a week or like 1 hour a week or something that someone does. But from a consumption perspective in the bundle, and this is where we have to talk about sales and pricing and so on and so forth. If that answer is it's cheaper to have an automation do it, I think that's your answer, to be honest with you. It's very much an it depends. And you can add process costs in this. You can add VM runtimes. You can add all of that. But I would almost not advise against doing that, but I'd almost start with the napkin math high ROI first. And then if you deem like, hey, this is something worth exploring, then I think what you're talking about makes more sense. But it really just comes down to what's the benefit of not automating this and what's it costing to the business? Because that's a cost savings that you can substantiate.
And I make it super concrete.
Yeah, sure.
At the end of this thing, we're going to show you guys a product we made, which is we bought RPA at IQ so that you guys can learn RPA. So we had to go buy RPA, and part of having RPA is having VMs. And I personally am the guy who sets up your VMs, and I have billable work right now at $200 an hour I could be doing. So every time I go make a VM for you guys, I'm not doing billable work for $200 an hour. So if 100 of you guys sign up for VMs, I'm going to use that chart that KJ just showed you, right? To decide if I need to automate setting up the VMs or not. And I'm probably going to automate it, right? Because I got clients who are waiting for me to do other stuff, right? So if only 3 or 4 people buy a RPA environment, then I'm just going to do it by hand, right? If 100 people buy one, I'm definitely going to use RPA to provision your VMs. And which would be kind of cool, right? RPA for provisioning RPA. It's that kind of a product where it can like meta, right? It can automate itself. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to use our RPA for you guys if that's what happens, right? But I'm not going to do it if it's like all the way on the left side in the benefit side, right?
Right.
That really means something.
It does, yeah, and it's a great question to ask, but you're spot on, right? It depends, and I hate to give you that answer, but you kind of need to get into the numbers. But once you start getting into the numbers, it becomes, I think, a little bit more clear, and that's kind of the beauty of, honestly, management consulting, right? That's the purpose of being a solution architect, right? Is to actually dig deep into those things, right? And these tools just remember the tool is nothing more than the means to the end, right? Means to an end. Yeah, I think that's what it is. That's what the tool is, but we still have to think about this stuff, right? It's not just magic. Once it's magic, then we have a bigger problem on our hands. You know what I mean? Like that. That's neither here nor there. So,
Yep. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. It's a great question. It means you're thinking about it properly. That's awesome. I love that. So cool. So after you move on to here, right? After you approve it, assign a project manager. Not really important for our purposes right now. It's just a phase of what you need to do. Then from that, what you do is you start your automation, which moves it from the evaluation phase into now we're talking about our design, build, test, and ultimately production. I'm just going to stay in design and build just for our purposes right now. If we have time, we can get to test production, but I want to make sure I kick back to the IQ folks. Right there. What's really cool is like within this, if you want to get email notifications for everyone, the tool facilitates this. If you have actual applications that you're trying to track, really cool that you can do that. Or process board and say, hey, I'd like to start the sprint phase 1 for design or whatever the case may be. RPA manager allows you to facilitate all that from a project management perspective. Super cool. Not important for our purposes, but just something I wanted to bring up. Okay. So then you do that, click save. And then what this is going to do is kick you into the actual design phase where we can actually high level start gathering requirements, gather screenshots. I'm going to do that briefly, and then I'm going to get into the build, which is, I think, the more fun stuff here. But super, super important things. Once you do that, we open our specific process from the process management tab. And then you see here, we've got like this diagram with these. I think a question to bring up is what is something that you need in every process? You need a start task and you need an end task. You do not need a bot task or a user task, but obviously if you're building an RPA script, there's going to be some sort of bot task. RPA does also lend itself to what we consider human in the loop. Our builder and our RPA manager functions allow you to create user tasks that if you want to grab some values out, present it in some form for approval or denial, we can facilitate that as well. Not important and not really as important necessarily for the exam, but something that you should note we can do. To that point, if I wanted to design it, I can play around. I'll call this, just the RPA challenge. It's really a standalone, script within itself. Doesn't really need too much more logic within that. But if you wanted to talk about the loops, we can add decisions. We can add, whatever you want there. But it's just a simple diagram. I'm not going to step into the recorder, but we do have an RPA recorder that does allow you to click on specific functions and generate a script. I might be speaking a little out of turn here, but I have found the recorders actually better for education purposes in terms of the activities that you would use versus actually generating a script right now. I would say things like Einstein for Flow, Copilot, those types of things are better from an AI augmentation perspective. RPA isn't necessarily there yet, in my humble opinion. However, we do have the recorder, which is really good if you want to increase time to value from a diagram perspective. Although I will say this audience is pretty technical, I don't think y'all are going to get benefit from the recorder as much as I would say a business person would learning the tool. Okay. So I just wanted to say that out in the open, but knowing the recorder can diagram things is something that I think is worthy to note for not only the exam, but just something that actually matters from an implementation perspective. Okay. With that, what you can do, you can start having documentation on this. You can do edit. If you wanted to say step 1, right, open the Excel file. And then what you can do is you could grab like a screenshot of something. We could say, okay, cool. I want to grab this, save it as I'm just going to save it here. Downloads. And then if I want to add that into my documentation, just like you'd expect, find your image URL. In short, just like you'd expect if you're doing requirements gathering, RPA is no different. The more that you can help the developer understand what the actual click strokes are, the functions, the easier it is to develop. I don't think that changes whether you're building a low code solution or an actual coded solution. I don't think there's much different at all. We want to understand your inputs. We want to understand the expected output. We help facilitate that as a requirement inside of RPA Manager. Okay. So just wanted to bring this up for our purpose. It's not necessarily, there. I'm not building this out to the nines, but just wanted to show you that once we diagram our process and say, hey, this is what we're looking to build, we move from the design phase, publish that with a process definition document. If you find yourself in RPA development, you will love PDDs, and I say that with extreme sarcasm. But to that point, you will release this to build, and then from there, while it is important, right, that is where we actually get into the RPA builder, and now I'm going to build out this exercise. Okay, so as you can see, your phases: evaluation, design, build, and then ultimately we're going to move into testing it, where you specify activity parameters and nothing else. That's also an answer on the exam. And then ultimately create a production configuration, which makes that invocable and back into it. Like I said, if we have time, we'll get to that point. Okay. I know I'm going pretty fast. I'm just trying to expose you to these things because obviously, you want to go back and whatever. Everything tracking along. Any other questions, comments, so on and so forth? Otherwise, I'm going to get into actually building this thing and running it because it is pretty cool to see it work.
I'm not going to stop you for it unless it's not coming later. You said there's bot tasks and user tasks. Are there user tasks later or only bot tasks?
I was only doing bot tasks. I could throw in a user task, but I haven't played around with it.
Don't put it in the demo, but at least we should know about the user to tell us.
Yes. Yeah. So we could, we'll cover, we'll just cover it at the end. Just little things like that. We can do that at the end. Yeah. The main thing is once we get into builder, that's where a lot of like the important stuff happens and understanding like how do you invoke it, so on and so forth. Right. So once we do this and it's in the build phase, then you can actually start building. So an important thing to understand is you have to have your design approved and published before you can step into the build phase. That is a best practice thing. Other tools don't necessarily follow that mantra. Okay. That is a MuleSoft, not maybe just a MuleSoft specific thing, but I know for MuleSoft RPA specifically, that is a requirement in order to start the build. Once you do that, you'd go to RPA Manager, download your RPA builder. It's a Windows tool for now. Maybe we'll have a Mac version later. Ryan decided to yell at me on the UiPath stuff for that, which was pretty funny. To that point, once you do that, you can step into the RPA builder, and then you can see right here, I'm looking for my specific process. We can see, oh yeah, right here. This is the one that we are looking for. And then you'll see that same diagram get pulled in that we built inside of our design. And then once we click into that, that allows us to actually build our workflow. So this is the IDE. This is where the rubber meets the road for 99% of the rest of the demonstration. The way it works is just like we talked about, if then else logic. The way you build automations is define your application, define the scope, find the activity that correlates to the specific function that you're looking for. So if I'm interacting with Excel, I will use an Excel session. If I'm interacting with a desktop app, I'm going to use an app session. If I'm interacting with a website, I'm going to use a web session. We have it for Chrome, Firefox, Edge, list goes on and on. If I am clicking a button, if I am typing into a specific field, if I am putting in an if statement, the list goes on and on. You don't need to know the activities to the nines. That is something that you don't need to know. You can always look that up. If you're a coder, you've gone to Stack Overflow how many times? It's no different, right? But understanding that if then else logic correlates to a function is key. Okay. So if I wanted to build this exercise, the first thing I'm actually going to do is say, I need to open up that RPA challenge website. You could do the Excel part too, but I'm just going to build it like that. Both are interchangeable. But what I would do is I would pull in a web session. So I'd go right here. I'll pull in a web session for Chrome. And then right here, we have this nice little browser wizard that I actually think is pretty great. Not every RPA tool provides this. So this is actually a differentiator of MuleSoft RPA, which is pretty great. And it was nice coming here from 5 years, coming from somewhere else, right? What you'll do is you'll just put in the URL that you are looking to interact with, right? And then right here, assuming it's a valid URL, you'll click this open browser wizard. And you'll see, I already built that before. It actually gives you a simulated session of, and it's not simulated, it actually just clones a session of your browser and allows you to actually see. And now you can see all these like different fields that are popping up. This would be the equivalent of actually trying to pull from an HTML, XML, whatever the case may be, using some sort of code, right? This is allowing our technology to get directly into that HTML, XPath, whatever function we want to grab from and allow us to do something with the specific text or field that we're interacting with. So when you think about how RPA works, we're legitimately interacting with the system on the front end, which is dope. I think that's awesome. When I saw this, I was like, this is money. This is great. Now, mind you, I wasn't a coder before, so obviously I probably appreciated it more than y'all would, but you get the idea. But
No,
that is,
KJ,
yeah,
we can do it. There's Python scraping, there's
of
Selenium.
course, yes.
And this is still dope. So just because we can do it with code doesn't mean it's better to take
Yeah, I saw Maxim came off. Did you want to add something there, sir?
No, I thought I was just switching the microphone.
Okay, cool, awesome. Just want to be sure.
But,
I have
I do have a question. I'll probably ask it later, like about like the level of knowledge one would need to use the RPA. But we'll
absolutely
come to that.
that's what I'm saying. I'd rather spend the time at the end after I get through the build and I click run and you're like, oh, it actually worked. That's great. Yes, I would love to have those questions. I come with a wealth of it. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Can you please just Maxim? Can you put it in the chat and just tag it like question, like say question, so that when we come back around, we can bring up the questions. That's for
Yeah,
anybody.
and then we'll just call on you. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we'll do. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank
Cool.
you so
Awesome.
much.
So moving on. Yep. So right here, we've got our session. We know this is the website we're going to interact with. I can close down the browser wizard for now. That's good. And then you can do some simple parameters. So every time you pull in an activity, there are parameters, just like you'd expect whenever you're building some sort of, RAML spec, whatever the case may be. You're going to specify some sort of specific function. And that's no different from an RPA script. All of this is just an API. Like it's the same thing, right? It's just a package. So right there, got that. Cool. If there's any additional arguments where it's not a sandbox, I would love to see where all of these are, but you kind of have to like back into like figuring those out. In short, you wouldn't need to worry about it very much for RPA scripts, but just know you can specify specific settings if you want. Once you click OK, when we're in the web session, what's the function? So if we think about this as a user, I would say, oh, okay, cool. I want to copy this name and then I want to paste it into, the specific field. I'd say, oh, okay, cool. First name. I would do that. Robots operate like we'd expect. They don't necessarily follow the steps that a human would, right? We would probably configure a loop, right? So that's exactly what you would do in RPA. There's no difference, right? You could mimic it that way, but now we're starting to talk about the logic and so on and so forth. Don't make yourself complicated. Think like a developer. It's pretty easy, right? So if I wanted to do this in RPA, I'd say, okay, cool. Let me pull in my Excel session because the first thing we have to do is tell it what file to interact with, right? So once we do that, we've got a nice little wizard right here. Specify your directory path, which is like you'd expect. What's my specific file, right? We can parameterize this as well. I'm not doing it for this exercise, but you can download from an email, save the path as in a variable, so on and so forth. I haven't even covered activity parameters and so on and so forth, but I can if I need to. But to that point, right there, RPA, what's the file? I am just looking for the challenge file that I have there. Like I said, you can parameterize this. You can pass those as activity parameters, not necessary for our exercise, but just know all of this doesn't need to be hard coded. You can variabilize these. Okay. So then from that, you specify, am I reading and writing? Am I reading from the source and writing to a different file? Once again, it's that if then else logic, right? What's our step? We only need to read the data. So we're just going to leave as read only. Then from that, what do we do? Well, you can tell it the Excel file, but now we need to tell it the specific function inside the Excel file. What is that? Well, it is a loop. So we search for a loop. We see the Excel controlled loop pops up. I pull that in, and then you see right here, right? I'm going to check it has a header. This is kind of cool, and this is a really awesome thing. We can pull, if there was a sheet that we wanted to interact with, instead of needing to try and figure out how to code it, it will actually integrate automatically and pull the sheet in that you want, which is really awesome. So once you do that, I know it's sheet 1. I could change that if I wanted to. I can make it sheet 2, potato, it doesn't matter, right? And then what do I want to do? I could say start reading from row and column. I could read a part of a sheet. If you choose this, it's going to ask you what columns to use. I just know I want to read from the entire sheet. And then this is important because if you just end of sheet area, you will get a loop that goes like thousands of times, which we don't need. We just want to do it on that empty row because if we look at that Excel file, once we hit row 12, we're done. I did this before I checked that when I was playing around with this, and I got the loop and it just wouldn't stop. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got to check my parameter here, right? So funny things to bring up. But just like we'd expect, right? It goes back to the thing I've been saying 8 million times. If then else logic. What is the actual function we need? Find the activity and specify your parameters inside of said activity that allow you to achieve the function that you're looking for. If you wanted to specify a maximum number of rows, you could. Otherwise, once we reach the empty rows, we're good to go. And now the final step is inputting that data, right? So what we do is we look for in our web activities, keystrokes to web elements. I pull that in, and I'm just going to do this for all the fields, and there will probably be some questions as we go along. Use that browser wizard. If I want to start with email, because this is what the wizard is giving me, you hit F2. And right here, this might look familiar to you if you've ever done any sort of scripting on a website, like with a Selenium or any sort of web testing. You can see we pull attributes as well. As we see the ID and the name, that doesn't really make any sense, but we do see that this specific attribute, there is a label that says email. I would want to check that because when we click submit, the field changes, right? So if we do that, we see, oh, look, the ID and name changed, but guess what? The path didn't. That doesn't make any sense. So we want to be able to make sure we find the attribute that has a tag with what we're looking for. Once you check those attributes, now we can see, oh, we're going to input into that. Very, very important for RPA development. And once you understand this concept, you can fight anyone who says, oh, it's brittle. No, not really. We're looking for the specific attribute we're interacting with. Very important for this exercise, not necessarily as important with other websites because usually they're coded a little bit better. This one actually is meant to cause problems from an RPA development perspective, which is why I wanted to go through this exercise. Okay. So once you do that, you click that, and then this is where it's really cool. What text do I want to interact with? With this nice little thing, we can pull values from what we're doing from the Excel loop. It pulls all those column headers for you, which I think is awesome. Okay. So once you do that, email, you get the idea. My Slack's blown up. What's going on over here? Moving on. Cool. All there. Good. Loop, email. And then I would just replicate this for every activity. And if you want to make it easier, right, saying what it is, email, then I say, okay, what do I want to interact with? Instead of email, now I do company name, and you rinse and repeat, and so on and so forth, right? So that's it. I'm just going to follow this for all of the rest of the fields as we go along. Ryan, team, anyone, any questions in terms of what I'm building out? Does this kind of seem straightforward? Yes, I know I've built this exercise 8 million times, but I just want to make sure this is tracking. What I'm doing here is essentially what you'll do for virtually every RPA project you ever build, ever.
You will have the video, so you can pause it and do it,
Yep.
and then explain it. Yeah.
This one, what I'm doing here, you can do too, right? So so then just do that. But yeah, anything else, anything coming along? Is there anyone who's thinking about things they might have been tasked with from an integration perspective before they want to discuss, right? Just takes me a little bit of time. So I just want to make sure we answer all of those because I'm not only just a demo jock, I'm also someone who knows how to actually operationalize these things. So just want to help y'all out in any way that I can as I finish this out.
KJ, I think you're doing an amazing job, and I think this will segue because now people can actually watch this video once we post it tonight,
Yep.
and we'll tell you more about this. Ryan kind of alluded to this. They can purchase the lab environment to go through this themselves,
Oh,
and
beautiful.
we'll tell you more about that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. And I would say like the best way to learn RPA is to do it. Just to do it. Seriously, just to do it. And some people, and in a selling motion, sometimes that can be a little annoying sometimes because we're saying like, oh yeah, learn it. It's like, oh, this is amazing. And then you follow up a week later and you're like, did you play with it? They're like, oh, no, I didn't. It's like, oh, okay, like, come on, help me out. Right. But it's, for me, I think it's just candidly, once you kind of get the, what I call unconscious competence in terms of learning, like how these tools work, it really just up levels you from like a helping make things better perspective. It really does. And it's just because it's like you don't need to necessarily fall into RPA development, although not for nothing. Go search RPA and LinkedIn jobs and you will see a ton of hits. It's crazy, right? But to that point, I just think it's a very, very transferable skill that allows you to get into those process improvement conversations that everyone's trying to have, because I think everyone understands technologies are standardizing now, right? So learning how to actually use what's in your stack, RPA can be a really awesome complement to that, which is why I say so heavily to everyone who's like, I need to upskill, learn RPA. It's so applicable to everything. But anyway, and then to round this out, we just hit submit. And then if we wanted to see this run in action, that is it. That's all we needed. And then just to show what this would look like in real time, let me just minimize my environment here. Yep, perfect. And then you just hit play. So in the time that we took to have the discussions that we did, that is how quick it can be to build something using RPA, right? It's that time to value is so significant to people who are looking for answers, people who are looking for integration things, and so on and so forth. Obviously, I think we'd understand that we'd want to back end this as much as possible, but knowing that I don't have to do any of that and it's working right in front of you, it also makes a really awesome demo, to be honest with you, right? Because it's kind of cool. You're seeing it happen in real time and so on and so forth. But and like I said, with y'all's audience, right, you'd obviously understand the more we can back in this database to database, you get the idea. But sometimes this is actually sufficient for what businesses are looking for. So that is really the build of the challenge in a nutshell. I can go through invocable configuration runs if we want, but I think we could talk about it high level. To that point, that's really all I wanted to show.
That
Yep.
was the building.
Okay.
So even if you're not going to show it, maybe at least, for somebody who isn't familiar, I think a lot of these people are not familiar. What happens with the bot?
Oh, yeah, I'll walk through it. Yeah, so if we wanted to get to a point, yeah, I'll just walk through this in Manager right now. So yeah, once we're done with this, we would yeah, actually, you know what? I'll just walk through the whole phase because it's good. I won't actually deploy it or run it to the bot, but I think what you're talking about is key. So what you would do is after you're done, I'm good with this project, changes, completion of first pass, right? You obviously want to go through your testing phase now once you've built it. We obviously don't want to avoid best practices from that perspective. If there were any activity parameters, which are your variables and arguments, if you want to pull something down and get a value from a response in an API and use it in your RPA flow, that's what that's designed for. Or vice versa, RPA grabs a value and pushes it out. That's also important from a best practice perspective to understand. Once you do that, this uploads the project. This pushes it back into RPA Manager. Okay. And then from that, we can just round out what we're looking for here. Once we go into RPA Manager, I'm just going to refresh this. We can see instead of that red X, we now get something that is blue and happy and exciting. No errors, no warnings. Once we do that, out of the build phase, we want to go into our test phase. Okay. And in our test phase, right, all you would do is right here, you get this nice little module here that says, hey, I want to create a test plan, right? What do? You give it a name, enter a description, you specify your activity parameters, which allow you to, right, put in different values to test for based on results, where you would verify what do you need to do when you create a test plan? You specify your activity parameters. That is an answer on the exam, okay? You'll see it in the practice and you'll see it there. What is a test plan designed for? To allow you to create your unit tests accordingly, or whatever you want to call them, that allows you to choose all of your specific different functions, pass, fail, blah, blah, blah. You do it here. There's no parameters in this. If there is a user task, you'd go here. We can send the email notification once it's ready. I didn't put any user tasks in the workflow, but that's where they would show up. And then your execution, this is important. Usually the answer best practice is always run this in a secure session, right? Just from a governance perspective. If you wanted to run it in an existing console for whatever reason, the company has deemed that the user who's logged into the machine that they want to run this on has all the parameters accordingly, you can do existing console and configure the user as well. We would always recommend secure session, and this would be if you're looking for an equivalent to other tools, unattended. This is the equivalent to running it, quote unquote, attended. Okay, which means it's taking over the mouse and keyboard of a specific user. Secure session clones that Windows machine, runs it on that accordingly, so you can stream there. And then ultimately you would choose your specific bot to deploy it on. I already have this thing deployed in a non-secure session. I would actually need to do it this way. I have it configured so I can run these things locally. Deployable, finish. And then from that, I would just click the start tests and it would just run those tests accordingly. Okay. Any questions on the test phase? I know it's a little high level. If you've worked with a testing tool before, it's meant to mimic that specific type of functionality. A little bit more bare bones than what you might expect in the Selenium, but to that point, we just want to facilitate the best practices from creating a test plan and specifying your activity parameters. Okay. Any questions, comments around that? Or Ryan, I saw you put a heart, so I think I'm saying the right things here, but you get the idea. I will take silence as a good thing. So once we do that, let's assume we've run our test cases, we would ultimately get into production. This is where I think we can start talking about best practices, rubber meets the road. There are two different types of way to deploy RPA bots, right? One is to just create a run configuration based on a schedule. All right. So if I do this, you'll go into here, configuration name. All right. Just following the naming convention we've been using. You can specify your priority. I think it's 0 to 100. Same thing, activity parameters, if there's user tasks, execution, and then here's the trigger. So if you want to just schedule this at a certain point without using a trigger, you can do that. You add your schedule and then just choose the bot that you're deploying on. For our purposes, and usually what people are using MuleSoft RPA for in a greater end-to-end automation integration is actually creating this invocable run configuration. Okay. And I'll show what this looks like here.
And that could be invoked from Salesforce Flow. It could be invoked.
Yes, that's what I was exactly going to say.
Invoked from Mule, which we all like. So
and that's the whole point, because what happens is once you create the invocable run configuration, and I'll just do this right now. I'll just choose a random one real quick because I'll just delete this right afterwards because I'm not actually going to run it. Right. So once you do this, this invocable run configuration now shows up in Exchange. So let me just make sure that I'm not lying here. Let me go actually find it. But like once you do that, that's what creates the end URL that you're looking for. And then in a tool like Composer, which you'll learn a little bit later, you can pull in the RPA script. It's automatically integrated. But as Ryan's alluding to, we need that URL to pull that into Mule anyway, just like you'd want that URL if you wanted to pull that into Flow as well. So if we go to here, let me go to Exchange. I should be able to find the thing I just built. And this backs into what y'all are familiar with, right? And there you see it right there. There's my API. And then we've got it integrated with the endpoint. So when we think about composability, so on and so forth, you are going to be presented a lot of questions on the exam if you take it. How do you build things in RPA? And then how do you actually invoke RPA scripts as part of a bigger picture? Knowing how this all works is super important. The cool part is we've obviously built the integrations inside of Salesforce that allow you to connect to MuleSoft services. As long as the asset is available on Exchange and an endpoint's available, you can pull it into your respective apps accordingly. Okay. Very, very important to understand invocable run configuration versus a run configuration. Run configurations are schedule based. Invocable means we're using some third-party REST client to invoke that accordingly. Okay. Yeah, that is the full gambit of RPA Manager. Guess we had the time. It was a good segue. But that is pretty much a nice little crash course into how do I evaluate an idea, design an idea, build an idea, create a test plan, and then ultimately run that on a bot accordingly. There's going to be other questions that come up. I think that's what the study, continued study groups and your learning is going to help you facilitate. But once you understand this, guess what? You've learned how RPA works at virtually every tool out there.
You gave us more than a taste. Like if I was in a food court, you didn't just give me one little piece of chicken. You gave me like half of a meal. So
yeah. That helps, right? And if we go back to why we started with what was my career, like what I learned was you can demo stuff that's canned, or you can do it live in front of people. Now, sometimes that's not possible if you think about end state. Like if you think about Salesforce proper, right? Like when you're talking about any sort of experience cloud, you're usually talking a little bit more about here's your current state and here's what the end state would look like. A little bit easier to demo that with a canned environment, but RPA does take a lot of different flavors, a lot of different forms, and so on and so forth. So I learned with tactical solutions like that, the more I can show you how to actually do it, we can back into the why. So thank you for that. But that's really kind of what I had hoped to do. And this is, like I said, it's what I've been doing for 5-6 years at this point, right? Like it's the more I can show you what it is, the easier your questions go from, is that possible, to, hey, I have this specific scenario. Let's actually discuss this, which I think is a good segue into, what we want to discuss.
Let's take that in Max's direction then. Cause I think
exactly.
We have a good question. And, for everybody's interested in we don't know how interested you are in RPA. So, if you're more interested,
perfect. I'm reading it right now. Okay.
You have to tell us that so that we could have another study group in a couple of months about this. We don't have to do RPA, but if you guys like studying RPA, we'll do more of them. I think right now we're all the way out to like May though, so better tell us that you want it.
We're
Otherwise,
out till June.
we're out till June. Yeah.
Yeah.
So got to tell us what you want to study. So I could read your question. You wrote it up really nice, or you could just do it yourself, summarize it. There's really like, I think what I'm seeing is you're looking at adoption, right, Max?
Yeah. So maybe I don't know if anyone's read it already, but it's mainly.
I did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But it's mainly like I've been to several companies in kind of solution engineering roles or like consulting roles, and I've seen them. So actually, so one company already had like RPA in house, and it was actually right path. And they ultimately like it was there. They paid and were continuing paying lots of money for it, but it was totally not used, right? I've seen a setup where they had some automations in place. They were running one day, and then actually like people were hoping that okay, it will run like kind of on itself and it's work forever. It was a company with probably without any own software developers. It was more like an energy distributor or provider, and right, so they were hoping things would run, but systems change. The systems where the bots were running were changing. The systems with which these bots were communicating were changing, and then with the time it just stopped working, and like nobody even realized that so that
Right.
half of the automations were not running and like was going to hell. And but so it was kind of going nowhere. People were spending money on it, and there was no understanding like what to do with it because there were no scale.
Oh, good. Sorry.
Sure. No, and then another use case. So there was another company, and they were kind of more advanced. They had also a big one, kind of a retailer, not the one where I'm at the moment, but so they had software developers and they had business people working together, implementing whatever products they needed or building integrations. And then from the top, so CIO and CTO perspective, they were thinking how to make their life easier. They were looking at the use cases. Yes, some business teams do work, Excel still, and sending those Excel via emails or putting it on a file share. And so they were thinking, okay, let's try to make their work easier. Let's introduce RPA or kind of a low-code environment so that those business teams could, as you say, like do POCs, like or do some kind of quick wins. And if it works, then the devs will come and automate that. And that failed. And that failed for the reason so business teams could not do that on themselves.
Yes.
So they were kind of seeing the RPA, you need to move icon, left to right, and then it will work. It's not the case. So even from your demo, it's a lot of things you need to know. So from my point of view, it's still a development. So it's still a kind of
it is.
So,
yeah, it is. Yeah.
And so and then at these two situations, like what would be your advice for CIOs of these companies, how to make them successful RPA?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a valid point, like not to use RPA. I don't
Could
know.
be. Yeah. Yeah. In my point of view, and mind you, I got hired here from my point of view on RPA. So like, I'll just give you the candid reality of what it is. What you're describing actually has very little to do with the tool and everything to do with change management and resourcing. And I'll tell you why. I'm not sitting here and saying that any random user is going to be able to pick up RPA tomorrow. I'm also not going to sit here and say that any random user is going to be able to pick up Composer. You are spot on in understanding there needs to be some sort of objective way to look at a process. You need to be able to break stuff down. I think at minimum, people who would be identified as power users or actually understand systems analysis or systems design at a little bit of a higher level have a bigger or a higher propensity to be able to learn these tools. Okay. I am very bullish on the fact that I think everyone will be using these tools, but I also recognize that I'm very naive in that. I completely understand, but that's because, hey, I'm the power user who made it, right? So I'm speaking from experience. So I would say, first off, if your CIO is looking for that, make sure there's actually a good change management exercise or some sort of change management around what you would consider for a center for enablement, right? If that's lacking, RPA is not going to solve the problem, right? So I think you start there. Then you start getting into, okay, let's say I have software developers, but they don't want to use RPA. Then you need to start looking at what the business is asking for and see if it actually aligns to any objectives at the top. Because honestly, at the end of the day, if people are trying to build some niche type thing, but it's not actually solving a business problem, there's no visibility. And at the end of the day, who cares, right? You know this, I know this, that doesn't change. So it's really change management. But back to the point of what you're asking, like who's the people who actually build these? There needs to be some sort of mechanism to be able to certify and or identify users who actually know how to create like a VLOOKUP in Excel, actually understand how to diagram a process. Like I call them, honestly, the people who are really, really good at RPA are like the moms on teams. I swear to God, right? But the reason I say that is because guess what? They've got a project management lens because guess what? Women are just running the world, whether we want to admit it or not. Like my wife runs my household, right? She's, like it's the same thing how it happens in team. I know I'm being facetious, but like they have an understanding of the bigger picture. They know how to get deep. They can identify the individuals to break down a process. Once you do that, it's very easy to spend sessions like this and get the skills. So I would say people with Excel certifications, people who have certs under their belt, people who have, like I said, the propensity to learn and the ability to diagram a process. Those are the people that I would identify to be your RPA developer light, your composer developers, your low code, your quick script, because what they're going to do is probably have an ambition and a desire to sit down and learn these tools. There is no fast track to learning how to build these things. What you just witnessed is 6 years in the making. You know what I mean? Like,
I know that's why I'm asking, right? So
yeah,
I know
and so
your
I'm just
experience in
giving
it,
you
right?
the reality of it's very much more a change management exercise that is aligned to actually determining what the value of an automation is first. And if there is enough opportunity, then it becomes, is your Center for Enablement equipped to facilitate, not build, facilitate education, enablement, training, and really adding the governance to someone building an RPA challenge, someone building a read from email and do this. And I know I'm giving you a consultant answer, but what I've really
I know.
deduced is but what I've really deduced, and it's a hard problem. And this is why people say like API everything and blah, blah, blah. But then like, they're like, I can't do
Yeah.
it. What are you going to do?
There
Right.
right. There is a total. I mean, I think I know there is a discrepancy between how we sell these tools and like what it
Bingo.
really is,
100%.
right?
Yes. And it happens. Now, mind you, I'm hopefully trying to help fix that. I'm not trying to like perpetuate the problem, right? But to that point, there's a type of individual, and they're usually the ones who are yearning for more in their careers. Those
Yeah.
are the people that I would actually target because they know process design, they get the analysis specs. You could probably throw them in a coding class and they'd be like, okay, I kind of get this stuff. They're the people who start because guess what they can do, what IT doesn't have the time to do? They can actually evangelize these tools on your behalf. But once again, it has to be built into the bigger picture of what the CIO is trying to do from an automation perspective. If there is no actual structure behind why you have a center for enablement, you're putting the cart before the horse. Like it's just the reality. So I always educate people, find the people who have the propensity to learn, give them the time and like gamify it, like say like, hey, if you take this course and actually learn it and build something, like you get a Starbucks, like I don't know what you do, right? Pizza part, but whatever. But like the more you can actually incentivize your people to understand how to build these things, the better your change management exercise becomes. RPA is one of those very interesting things that you really learn by doing, because theoretically, I think all of us understand what automation means. So that would be my advice. And it's just really identify if someone has an Excel cert, they can build RPA scripts. People go, really? I go, yes. Because guess what they've
Just
learned? They've learned the functions.
yeah,
Huh?
sorry, I wanted to make a joke. So I'm like currently living in Germany, right? And Germany and change management is it's not the best friends, yeah.
Yeah, yes, and it's funny that you bring that up, especially coming to, like MuleSoft, right? But it's
Mhm.
it's one of those, it's tough. It's very, very tough. So I always
Yeah.
lean into people like us should learn the theoretical nature as to why these tools exist, when you would use one versus the other. But we really need to start enabling businesses to really, this is what I would end on. If the business can actually learn how to provide proper requirements for an automation, this becomes less of an issue because what you're doing is actually making like a push and an effort to educate the business. If you don't do that, you could sit there and identify 50 people in an organization. It doesn't matter because there's no actual wrapper around, hey, I have this idea. I don't think we should be using a robot for it, but here's what I've built right now. There should be some sort of filtration mechanism, which, hey, isn't this the Center for Enablement conversation? Take this, doesn't actually make sense. What are you saving? But when you can actually demonstrate that, you get the idea. But that actually is much more important than just grabbing 50 people and being like, hey, here, learn this tool. This audience is different because guess what? Y'all have shown propensity to want to learn. Fantastic. You're the type of people we're looking for. They exist inside of the businesses, but we have to find a way to find them, which is why that would be my advice to the CIO. And that's going to change based on the organization. Some organizations might be forthcoming and say, hey, we're going to run this whole session. We're going to spend you a whole month. We're going to give you time off to do this, blah, blah, blah. Other companies just don't prioritize it. Okay, fine. But that's the candid reality of where we're at. And if I look at the people who are growing and learning RPA, they're people like me. They're people like you. They're people like us on this call. They want to learn, they want to upskill, they want to grow. Trying to throw a tool at someone and saying you're going to save time if they're apathetic, you and I both know that doesn't matter. So that's my candid answer. If you really want the specs of what people have learned, go to my LinkedIn and just read the damn experience. That's the people you're looking for. You know what I mean? Like that's the reality. It's a tough question. It's very, very tough. And that's why there's a ton of consulting firms out there that do a lot of this sort of thing, whether it's education and enablement or integration. I just know the companies who are spending the time to actually create an enablement mechanism to teach businesses how to gather proper requirements are the ones who succeed with these tools. It actually doesn't matter whether they learn the tool to the nth degree. It matters why they would use the tool. And that comes from understanding business requirements. So that's my answer. I know it's super long-winded. I know it's not direct, but it's just hard because it will take shape depending on the organization who's looking for it. So that's my candid answer, which is why I've been in the consulting game for so long.
I'll tell you what, I think I'm going to try to, we're getting into RPA and I feel like we are real hardcore. Like I got into integration in 2009 because I knew it was going to keep growing. And I got into MuleSoft back then because I knew they had the right idea, that they're tuned into what's next in IT. And IT keeps getting more complicated. And not all of it is going to have APIs. I'm already a customer of some stuff that doesn't have some APIs. So even if today people don't get it and they don't understand why they want to go learn some graphical scripting, like it's not important what people already get. It's important what they're going to need to know how to do, because IT is going in a direction whether you like it or not. And I think automation is necessary. I don't think we're only going to see it explode in the next 5 to 10 years, I think. And that's what I thought about MuleSoft. So I don't know if I'm going to keep picking winners, but MuleSoft seems to agree with me. I didn't know MuleSoft was getting into automation. I didn't know that was coming. And then they bought it, and look at that. And I think so.
And now I'm here.
Yeah, and now you're I'm learning it because I personally think this is going to be one of those superpowers you have to have in the next 5 years. So I'm learning how to do it. That's why that's why we're having this study group. So I hope you guys, I mean, I don't know if you agree or not, but I think it's worth learning.
Well, I just want to say back to the mindset question or answer. When you bring in things like MuleSoft or competitor products, right? It's all about that mindset and that adoption, or it fails, just like KJ said. And so when you're learning this new tool, you're going to have that methodology, and you're going to have to look at that and say, okay, how can, if I'm selling a product, how can I teach people this methodology? In some cases, you might see people say the automation mindset. Some people have the API-led approach or a C4E, but you kind of have to have a mindset. Otherwise, it just goes flat, or it's not implemented properly. Are there any other questions? I
Well,
don't
we
know,
better
KJ, if
wrap
you're
up.
wrapping up.
We
Okay.
better wrap up. Yeah.
So I'll share my screen.
Yeah, we're in wrap up. Yeah, we're chilling.
I'll share my screen. I just want to say, KJ, thank you so much
No problem. Happy to help.
for this. This was awesome. Many of us are integration engineers, and we sometimes have not thought about automations. So this is definitely giving us another tool to add to our skill set. And I'm hoping that everyone has left with excitement around MuleSoft RPA, want to use the tool, have exposure, and then are able to tell their friends and coworkers about it. I have placed KJ's LinkedIn, so you can follow him on his LinkedIn page. He also has his YouTube channel. KJ, can you put that in the chat?
I can. Yeah, I'll find it
You
real quick.
guys
Yep.
want to see his crash course? Hopefully, he'll have some MuleSoft RPA ones up there soon.
It's coming eventually. Once I
Okay,
get through all these like things,
coming soon.
eventually I plan on recreating that for MuleSoft as well. Yeah.
Coming soon to your YouTube TV screen. Pretty soon. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to tell you what's coming up next. Okay, everybody can see my screen? Great. I'm assuming yes. All right, so up next, we have Between Two Mules, Ismeet Kaur and Shubham Kalsi, and they're going to talk about how you can cross-train in MuleSoft if you're a Salesforce professional. If you're already a MuleSoft professional, still come because we would love to hear your thoughts and to help those Salesforce professionals be able to cross-train in MuleSoft. So you can contribute. It's going to be in 2 weeks, April 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. PT time. And Maxim, you can tell me what it is in Germany, but pretty much 12 p.m. Eastern Time here. They also have a YouTube channel too that's called Between Two Mules. All right. So now, Ryan, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the MuleSoft RPA lab environment.
I was just posting that on LinkedIn, actually. I haven't put it there yet. So you guys are so we I really think people learn best hands-on. I always do. And I got a MuleSoft trial account and Salesforce sandboxes and stuff like that to learn. And I did the same thing with OpenAI, and I did the same thing with Anthropic, and I did the same thing with Azure and AWS and Google. When you want to learn something, like KJ was saying, there's no better way than going and hacking and figuring it out yourself. So what we found, we realized you can't do that with RPA. And so we went and bought it, and we're terrified and we need your help paying for it. So what we figured out we would do is we would make you be able to use our RPA environment. So we really did buy it for you guys. And that's what I'm posting on LinkedIn. So we made it possible. You can buy a lab and you can use our VMs too, in case you have Mac, a Windows VM, for 5 days or for a month. So there's a link. I don't know where, I guess the link's in the chat. You can just go get it and I'll set you up and you'll get in our Slack and I'll help you learn how to use it. This is exactly where Whitney and me, and we're all learning RPA with this lab. So I have it. I was using it this week. It works. Diane just taught a classroom using it. So you're happy to come try out our lab and do the RPA challenge yourself. That's what it is. Plus, we like to have all you guys in our IQ community Slack because we learn from each other. And, if you're the first people using these labs, you can tell me what needs to be added to the lab and maybe I'll add it. Maybe the lab needs to have some feature or some, maybe you can influence what we're making. So, be part of our integration quest getting started. That's what it is. Watch for my LinkedIn post coming in a few minutes. Did you put the links in the chat to the offers? Yeah, there they are.
Links are in the chat.
I see them in the chat. Yep. So that's how you can get an RPA lab. We're also going to do the same thing for Composer, so you can try that too at some point. So we're not doing that in today's session. So yeah, this is how you can learn hands-on.
Right. Thank you, Ryan. And then a few weeks ago, we relaunched the MuleSoft Certified Preparation Workshops. And our next workshop is going to be on the 5th for MCD Level 1. And it's going to be on Friday with Ryan at 11 a.m. Central Time. The link is in the chat, as well as the Hyperautomation Workshops waitlist. So Hyperautomation Specialist Workshop waitlist is up. And also that is in the Zoom chat if you want to get on the wait list. So really, we want to get interest. And if we get enough interest, then we'll open up a class. But what's going to be different is we are going to help you prepare for your certification. So we're looking at the data sheets. We're putting together MuleSoft engineering related concepts that are relevant to the exam. So you're going to get exam prep as well as reinforcing those MuleSoft integration concepts. All right.
All right. So 2 weeks from now. Oh, is that what you're doing? Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that's the next slide. It's fine. Two weeks from now, we're having our next study group. Every 2 weeks, we have study group.
Right,
This is
so
always going to be
that's
free.
the slide.
You can always come to the study group, bring your friends who want to learn stuff. We do change the topics and we do take your input on the topics. 2 weeks from now, we're doing our very first co-branding with MuleSoft ambassadors, brand new MuleSoft ambassadors, Ismeet and Shabam. They are between two mules. They have a great YouTube series on learning Mule. And so they're coming over and they're going to be here in 2 weeks. This is more for people who are coming into MuleSoft from Salesforce. So a lot of you, I recognize your names. You already know a lot about MuleSoft. So invite your friends who don't and want to learn MuleSoft from a Salesforce perspective. That's the one in 2 weeks.
Okay, so let's go back to the last part. So this is the last part. Tell your Muley colleagues and friends, or just your integration or automation friends that are curious about MuleSoft. Here this is a study group environment, like nostalgic college environment. There is no wrong question. We won't laugh at you. But we just want to make something where you can come in, feel comfortable, ask questions, and help you learn. So you can tell about us on LinkedIn or any of your socials or word of mouth. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Alrighty, that's it for me.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much. See you in 2 weeks.
Awesome. Cheers, guys.
Yeah.
Hey,
Thank you,
Tomas,
Yeah,
guys.
are
KJ,
you
you rocked
actually...
it.
Oh, we lost Tomaso. I was going to
Thank
ask
you,
him if he was
KJ.
Salesforce.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Happy to help.
All right. Thanks,
That was
Max.
really great. So KJ,